So you have to come along and figure out a way to keep in communications with your family, with your loved ones. The tradition with sailors is a thing called Sailors' Valentines. Anybody ever seen these before? It's one of the oldest traditions that's still going on. And you can see they're very intricate. They started a little over 300 years ago. It is a lot of mythology as far as historians are concerned, but we do know some facts. Some facts is that basically it started as a British tradition, because if you think about it, the British were the first worldwide empirical navy. Literally 300 years ago, the British were around the world. Unlike our deployments today, which are about 6 months, their deployments could be 3 to 5 years. But they had a very limited amount of space. So how did you bring something home for your family that represented every place you had been? Their solution was to start gathering seashells and putting them in thin glass cases. And they would put all the different kinds of seashells in there, and they would, in the beginning, basically just throw them in. Well, by 1820, you can imagine some entrepreneurs were thinking, well, that's kind of cool. And I could see making money off this. So in Barbados, that center one you see in there is from January 1847. And it says Barbados. And Barbados was basically the end point. It's a really nice island in the Caribbean. A lot of us go there for vacation now. But for a lot of the navies, the Dutch, the British, and the Americans, both the Navy and the whalers, it was a last port of call before they headed home. And a cottage industry started by a couple of brothers who were British entrepreneurs, and they thought, this is a really great way to make money. So they started making these very intricate, very detailed Navy Valentines, Sailor Valentines. And if you want to come afterwards, you can see all the little details that are in them. There's glass in them, there's anchors in them, there's hearts. Some of them say, don't forget me, remember me while I'm gone, all kinds of sentiments like that. And these were really, really common up until about 1880, but they really have never completely disappeared. If you go to Barbados still, and a lot of the Caribbean islands, you will still find these kinds of shell artifacts. Okay, not so much anymore a sailor's valentine, but now they're a tourist item. So how do Seabees fit into this naval tradition? Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Like the rest of our military, whether they're soldiers or sailors, Seabees love their families. They love their girlfriends. They love their wives. They don't want to be separated any more than anybody else. Unlike most of the rest of the military, Seabees have an advantage in that they can either find or create their own mementos. They spend a lot of time when they're deployed with local artisans, whether you were in Vietnam, whether you were on an island in World War II, whether you are currently deployed to Afghanistan, you are with a lot of different people, and Seabees have a lot of contact with the locals. Add into that they also have a skill set that most of the rest of the military doesn't have. They, especially in World War II, were trained craftsmen. Now by default, they're not so much trained, but they become craftsmen as they're in the Navy. And they learn to build and make things, and they have a lot of hobbies. And it is a part of their makeup and their personality is to do certain kinds of things. So they also have access to tools, and they see using scrap material in a way that most of us don't see using it, whether it is for their work. I mean, how many times have you been someplace where Seabees didn't get the material they needed to make a runway, a latrine, a warehouse, or whatever it is you're talking about? They didn't get the right tools, they didn't get the right material, and they went out and they found it so that they could get their job done. There's a reason why their motto is can do. In the same way, when you're trying to create something for your family, you have access to a lot of scrap material that's usually put in a garbage can. And why would that go into a garbage can? With Seabee, that's something that can be something else. Okay? The other thing that happened in World War II especially, not so much now, is they were already employed. When World War II started, these are people who were journeymen and master craftsmen. They were making between, this sounds ridiculously low, but it was a lot of money back there, about $3,000 to $3,600 a year. Now, the average wage in 1940 was $1,300 a year, $1,368 a year, which works out to about $112 a month. So Seabees, the men who became the Seabees, the core of the Seabees, were making almost 3 times that amount of money. A first-class petty officer in 1942, a man who was probably a master carpenter, a master painter, a master craftsman, was only making $1,400 a year. He took, literally, a $1,600 pay cut to serve his country. So there's a little bit of a money issue going on here. There are certain things that those families were all expecting, had a certain lifestyle, and they weren't going to be able to live that way while he was in the military. The other thing that was going on that we have not experienced in a war since is the control of material. In World War II, everything from cloth and silk, women couldn't buy stockings. You know, you couldn't go out and buy a silk dress. You couldn't, if you had more than 3 cooking pots, you better be giving them up. You know, so metals were controlled, rubber was controlled. You didn't drive your car anymore, not on rubber tires. So there were a lot of goods, both common goods and luxury goods, that just were not available, whether you were in the United States or overseas. It didn't make a difference. You weren't going to be able to buy them because they weren't there. So you have to get a little bit more creative. Seabees, by their nature, think outside of the box. So V-mail, or Victory Mail, is the first wave of Seabee creativity. And what you're seeing here is a Valentine from 1944. V-mail was created to solve a logistics problem. And the problem was that it took 36 bags of mail to send home 150,000 letters. Now, Seabees alone in the Pacific, 170,000 guys, give or take. That's a lot of mail. So how did they solve this? I don't know. How many of you know what V-mail is, what Victory Mail is? Okay. So if I tell you, did you know that the originals are 7 inches by 9.5 inches large? And that these were, according to the National Postal Museum, and let me quote this exactly, V-mail ensured that thousands of tons of shipping space were reserved for war materials. And 37 mail bags required to carry 150,000 one-page letters was replaced by 1 single mail sack. Okay? The weight of that amount of mail was dramatically reduced from over 2,500 pounds to less than 45 pounds. That's a lot of poundage in a 4-prop airplane, let alone a ship. So we're talking about considerable weight reduction and more space for the things that kept Seabees, Marines, Army sailors alive. Now, this had to pass through a censor. There's somebody who read every stinking thing that was written, going both ways, which doesn't thrill me a whole lot. So you have to be able to get things through the censor to tell your loved one how you feel without it being blacked out or sent back. So everything that you see is something that's passed a censor, because you can see that it was mailed up there. And the ones that actually got through, their original size is 60% of the original. They were photographed on microfilm, and once they passed the censor, and then the microfilm is what was shipped in the mail bag. And then when it got to the States, it was put back through a machine and it was printed out as a photographic image. And that's what was mailed. So the ones that we have the most of are 4 1/4 inches by 5 3/16 inches. Very few of the original V-mail survive, although we do have some in our collection. And you can find, we probably have 300 or 400 V-mail in the U.S. Navy Seabee Museum archival collection, and they cover all the holidays and some things you would not like to know about, and some of them are a little more risque than others, and they actually got through, and I've got some of the nicer risque ones to show you in just a second here. But instead of writing a letter, a lot of times, like this one, they drew. Okay, and a lot of them we know came from headquarters company. So if you were with the Seabees, you realize that they have always had companies. Companies are groups of men or women in this case now. And a lot of times the rate that we would be familiar with today would be EAs, engineering aides. But they usually were attached to headquarters company. And not only would they draw one, but then they would reproduce it like on a mimeograph, and they would share it with everybody. So they could send it out like, going to the store and buying your Valentine. You didn't have to do a lot of work. All you had to do is write a little note on it. So some of them have personal notes, like the one over here that on the left, it says "so far apart now," and then on the right it says "Denny." Those are additions to that particular piece of V-mail. The original that we have several of these, doesn't have those kinds of little notes in it. So that's something he put in there himself. And then the other one on the right, that one is from 2nd Brigade. And you can see this one is from 49th Naval Construction Battalion. This one's from 2nd Brigade. And it says, "Darling, you're playing a major role in my post-war planning." So, it wasn't like they were just being static and that they were doing good for their country and they had no thoughts of going home. And that was their primary thought, probably. And it wasn't just, these usually upset younger people because they're like, "Oh my gosh, my grandparents, So these are some of the milder, racy ones, and the little poem on the left is very racy for 1944. We wouldn't get too upset. And we have to remember, these, for 1944, these are pretty racy, but they made it through the censor, okay? There are some that didn't make it through the censor because they were a little more graphic, okay?
Let's see those.
You would have to come do a research appointment for that because we don't put those out on exhibit very often. We have enough problems with this.
Really?
Yeah, some people get really upset, and we have some art out that upsets a few people sometimes, but you know what? That's what Seabees did, so that's what I'm showing you. This is the kind of stuff that they were thinking about. I know that shocks you, right? Okay, then there's a whole set of poetry. Now I have the originals here, and you can come up and read the poems if you want. They're up in the files when I'm done. But the one on the left was written by a man in the 133rd NCB, which is the forerunner of the one naval construction. I'm getting old and new, tongue-tied. So the Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 133 is, how do I say, historically linked to this particular battalion. It still exists, it's still in Gulfport. This particular battalion, this poem, was written in the time frame of Iwo Jima. Now I don't know for sure because we don't have a date on whether it was written, I believe just by the context of the poetry, that it was written right before he left. And the 133rd experienced the single heaviest loss of life in the Seabee community at Iwo Jima. So it is historically significant in what it is, and it's also significant in its expression of love and separation and not being able to tell their loved one what was going on.
Did that author survive?
It is something that we are trying to research, but yes, because it was donated like in 1969 or 1980. I can't remember. I have to look up the donation date, but it was actually donated by his wife. So he had to have survived at some point because she never remarried if he didn't. That's kind of the thing. Is usually we don't get something until after a Seabee passes away, and then the family is going through everything. And the one on the right is just a cute little poem. It's just a cute little "I miss you," but it includes both the poem and then little drawings, and that was a letter size piece as well. It wasn't a piece of V-mail, so that's kind of cute. Now they, like I told you, they had access to a lot of different kinds of tools and machinery, and they were talented human beings. So this particular piece is a piece of aircraft aluminum, and it was taken from a wrecked Japanese aircraft in Saipan and created into this bracelet. And you can see the engraving. It's got pretty deep etching in it. And again, it's available for you to see here. It was created by a Seabee who was in the 51st NCB, which is Naval Construction Battalion. And the piece is right here. So when I'm done, if you want to come up and take a look at it, you're more than welcome to come and look at it. Okay? Okay. And little teeny tiny wrists, you know? We're so much bigger now, you have no idea. And the same thing with this. Same gentleman made these, same piece of wreckage, different parts. The wreckage that was used on here is the plexi, the acrylic. It was the canopy to the wrecked aircraft. And it's been cut and formed, then painted. The seashells are money cowrie, and I have never been able to identify the middle one, but it came again from Saipan in after the Navy had taken the island back from the Japanese. So this is made from coins, and it is quite beautiful. And here it looks a little brass, but it's actually much more silver. And the two things I'd like to point out to you is that you can still read on the coin itself what it is. So it actually comes up and it says Australian shilling. So when he made this, he did not lose any of the detail on the front or back of the coin. Now, why is that significant? Because they're concave and convex. So the coins aren't flat in this piece. They are, and the thing you should see when you come up to look at it afterward is the shape of the coins. And it's one of the reasons why I love this piece so much, is because the craftsmanship on it is just so beautiful. Can you see now that the light, that they're all curved and they've all been hammered out? All the links are individually crafted out of what we would probably call baling wire. Okay, so it's steel wire. And the centerpiece in here is probably a piece of aluminum, although I haven't tested it. And it's engraved on both sides. One says New Guinea, 1944, and the other side says To Rosie Dawn, Love Half. Okay, they survived a long time. Their marriage was a really long marriage. And he sent that home to her in 1944. Okay, so like I said, that's one of my particular favorites. These kinds of things are made from learning local customs and trading. And I cannot tell you how many of these I have in the collection. And they found all kinds of things. So the one on the left is Seabee made. It's not native to the islands. And it is made from cowrie shells and 2 different kinds of seeds. Now, why would I not put this thing on exhibit for any length of time? Well, as you can imagine, the seeds are a little delicate, and I'm kind of get a little bit worried about it staying on exhibit for a long time, because you ever have something in your pantry that was a seed that kind of went belly up? Okay, this has the same potential, except it's 75 years old, you know, and it's been sitting basically in our storage for over 40 years. And so I want somebody 200 years from now to see the same craftsmanship that you're seeing today. It's on exhibit up here. You can please come up, take a look at it. It's sitting right here. It's about 32 inches long, and the detailed work in between and how it's put together is something that you might enjoy looking at. Yes. The piece on the right is a Bortusk, okay? And the Bortusk is very, very highly polished, and that was a native craft that a Seabee traded for. Again, these are all World War II, and Bracelet and the necklace were both made by members of the 15th NCB using local techniques. The Seabee made it using local techniques, and then the native islander used local techniques. And it was, as far as we can tell, it was made in one of two places. It was either made on Tonga, because neither one of them were really good about saying exactly which island they made it on. It was either made on Tonga or an island called Vanuatu, which I probably pronounced wrong. I can spell it better than I can pronounce it. So they learned a lot of different skills while they were overseas by working with the native and the locals. They still do that today. My son was in Afghanistan for 2 tours with the Seabees at a place called Camp Leatherneck, which is being dismantled as we speak. But one of the things he learned there was certain woodcrafting skills from a couple of the locals that were allowed onto the compound. Now, in the States, you would think, like I told you, that you'd be able to get your hands on things to send home. But again, there were 2 issues. One is those luxury goods issues, where there wasn't a lot of material. And the other one was money. And the third one was postage. It cost a lot more money to send something per capita, even though it was a penny or a 2-penny stamp. When you're only making $1,300 or $1,400 a year, that's a lot of money, especially if you're sending 7 a week. So 7 cents every week was going out of your pocket to send a letter. And that's just one letter. Okay, so they had to find small things that fit into envelopes and didn't weigh more than an ounce. Handkerchiefs became a favorite thing. Now the one up on the left is a hand-drawn 1942 here in Port Hueneme, and it's a sweetheart handkerchief, and he drew different things in the corners, the anchor and the American eagle is up in the right, and the sailors, the Navy wheel over on the left, and over here it has West Coast 1942, October 1942. So this is really early in the war, and it's still here. I have it out for you, and again, it's one of those things I'd be happy to show you because the drawing in it and the colors, the fact that the colors have maintained so well. I mean, this is 75 years old, folks, and look at the color in it. Is that amazing?
What kind of ink did he use?
We're still, we just got this not too long ago, and so we're trying to figure out if it's ink, if it's tempera paint, there's a couple of different things it could be, and we haven't tested it yet. So we're not too sure. And the family doesn't know. It's one of those things. We know that the black is India ink. And then the other thing that they could purchase that were relatively inexpensive were called sweetheart hankies. And you will find these occasionally on eBay, but they're not silk, okay? But they're still really nice. And this is back in the era when women carried hankies everywhere, okay? So you could find these until the 40s, but these 2 particular ones that I'm going to show you, this one says sweetheart on it, and this one says Seabees. And the thing about these 2 that makes them unusual is actually the colors, because most of them are pale pink and pale yellow and pale blue. But these 2 are really vibrant in color, and that makes them really unusual. You don't find those too often. The other thing that they sent, and this one's pretty fragile, but I really like it. It's from Virginia. There was a Seabee camp called Camp Perry, and just outside of what is Williamsburg. You might have been to Williamsburg sometime for vacation. It's a nice tourist spot. But Camp Perry was located just outside. And so you can see the color is slightly different, but look at all the details on it. And this one is to my wife, okay? And it has all the things that they thought were important. There's Seabees on it, and the Navy's on it, and stars and stripes are on it, and so these were the kinds of things they sent, and it was used to cover a pillow. So we have one out on exhibit that you can see that's out in the gallery spaces. That's in a lot better condition than this one. It came from American Pickers, and they donated that, but we have several men that are not. Now, after the war ended, the tradition did not. So the Cold War begins, and I don't know if you know anything about Seabee history, but one of the places where there were more Seabees at any one time was in the Philippines. And the reason for that is because contractors, the Navy tried to have a base built in the Philippines, and basically every contractor who looked at the bid went, can't be done, will never be done. Where you want to put it, not going to happen. And it became the single largest Navy base outside the United States because Seabees spent 5 years building it. And that would be Cubby Point and Subic Bay.
Subic Bay.
Yep.
We crushed the dock there, made them mad.
So from the early 50s to the mid 50s, the Seabees built every single part of Subic Bay and Cubby Point. They blew a mountain in half to make the runways that you guys were landing on. They took pilings, they drove piles out into the bay, and all that mountain is what you were landing on because they drove piles out into the bay. Now that base was completely functional. It had a huge crafts community along with several other things that we don't need to talk about outside the gates, but you could find almost any kind of craft that you wanted to outside those gates. And I found some beautiful things. I have tablecloths from 30 years ago that are absolutely stunning. They were extremely talented, and Seabees appreciated that talent. And so they brought home a lot of things. This thing is a combination of woven plant materials, pineapple fibers, coconut fibers, and a local grass. And then it is embroidered with a cotton embroidery thread. The inside of it, the material inside of it is so sheer, you can hardly believe it. And it's really, really flexible and strong. Now these are some of my favorite things, but there is no woman that I know of that can put her feet into these things, because they are itty bitty teeny weeny. They are like size 5 narrows. Okay? But what I want you to notice is the amount of detail and craftsmanship that went into this. There would be girls today that would kill to wear these things. Can you imagine? But their feet are all too big. Like my granddaughter is 10 years old and couldn't stick her foot in this thing. Okay? And it's velvet, and all this glass seed beads that are embroidered on the front of it, all the detail in the heel, all the intricate painting in it, and the paint isn't just on the surface, it does go back into the back, so you can see paint that wraps around and in a little bit. So they're just like fascinating. And we have several pair of carved heel sandals. So those would be things that you'd send home as well. They're really light. They're amazingly light. And they fit into sea bags really well, so it's one of those things, I don't know if you guys ever came home and came out and you had goodies in your bag. My husband did it so well that our grandchildren, if he goes away and he comes home, they want to know what he has in his suitcase, okay? So it is a third generation tradition in our family. Now, I talked to you about this fan. Again, this is also from the Philippines, so all the materials are found in the Philippines. This was in the late 1950s. And it's dyed and woven plant material. That's what pandanus is. The tortoise shell is so thin as to be transparent. You can come over and take a look at it. And the feathers are like marabou, but they're not. I'm not sure what kind of feather it is, but the down feathers are so delicate. But I have this vision of fanning yourself and being fluffed. All those feathers going everywhere. Other places that Seabees went that you wouldn't think about is Rota, Spain, was another huge place that Seabees built, and it was a petroleum oil and lubricant station, and it was ginormica. It's still very large, and Seabees went there, but again, you have that space issue, so what do you bring home? They brought home castanets. Okay? Now, why you would give your wife castanets, I'm not quite sure, but maybe they were hoping for a dance. I'm not sure. In Vietnam, a lot of these kinds of things came home. So again, the detail in them is what you really need to take notice of. It's inlaid with mother of pearl and shell it's painted, it's lacquered, it has brass hinges on all the corners. It has a bee up in the handle. So whoever had this made sure that they put a bee in it, which I thought was kind of funny. Usually it's bats, and you will find that there are bats all over the rest of the place, because in Asia, bats are a sign of good luck. Okay? But the inside is all very traditional Asian construction. Okay? So as you can see, it is a beautiful piece, and it's one of the nicer pieces we have. There are other things. Today, Seabees continue to deploy to far-flung locations around the world. Like I told you, one of my sons was in Afghanistan. I had kids in Iraq. We have Seabees everywhere except Antarctica right now. You could literally look on a map and you would find Seabees on almost every continent in the world today, except Antarctica. As we are celebrating Valentine's Day today with our loved ones, I'm going to go home. I'm going to have Valentine's with my husband, something I didn't get to do a lot for about 30 years. I'm going to have Valentine's with 2 of my kids and a bunch of my grandkids. That is a privilege. But a lot of these people, male and female, today they are spending Valentine's separated from their loved ones. Whether they are in the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, even the Coast Guard is in places you don't want to be. I was just in Alaska, and they make rescues on Valentine's Day. It's very cold up there right now, by the way. So, you know, the way we celebrate Valentine's and the way that the military, and particularly Seabees, celebrate Valentine's, they're very similar in many ways. But the one thing that they do that many of us don't have to do anymore is they are separated on Valentine's Day, and they have found creative ways to stay connected with their loved ones. So, do you have any questions or comments? Is there something else you'd like to see? There's a couple things up here that I did not talk about that I would be happy to. One is a coin. Now this one I brought out mainly because this is one of the things, it's here, my husband gave it to me. I was like, how am I ever going to wear this? Really, honey? Because it's huge and it's heavy, and he thought I was going to wear it around my neck. So sometimes it's the idea that counts, the thought that was wonderful, but it's more interesting here than it is around my neck. So some of the things we get are because some of the wives are going, really, he brought this home? And it would have fit me when I was 22, and for some reason he still thinks I'm that size and I'm not. So would you like it? So we have a collection of things that are kind of like that. But any questions?
You made a statement that you said there's no Seabees in Antarctica now?
Yes.
And that was attached to the XE6
Yes.
down there.
Yes.
We always had a contingent of Seabees.
Yes, till 94. The last Seabees left Antarctica in 94. Almost
Really?
all of it is by contract.
Yeah,
Contractors.
Science Center.
Rocketdyne, different contractors
Really?
get the contract every few years now.
I told you my uncle was in the Seabees.
Yes.
He was in New Guinea. I got a bunch of his New Guinea stuff. I'll let you look at it. I got a propaganda that the Japanese dropped
Yeah.
about Roosevelt running over the Aussies.
Yes.
And then my mother sent him shower shoes when he was in 2 feet of mud.
Yeah.
When he for Christmas.
And you would be amazed because they were in, we have no idea. If trying to construct something in a monsoon is a monumental task. And if you've ever been stationed to the Philippines and you saw the Seabees out on the runways, on those sides and the big ditches, they're 6 feet down in a ditch and you're flying down the runway, and they're trying to pump the water out of the ditch so that they can keep putting in all the sewage so that you can flush your toilet. You know, so yeah, they appreciate things like those shower shoes. Anything else? Anything you have? Anybody have any questions about anything we saw? Out in the exhibits, when you're looking around, there is several places where you will find similar items. One is over on the left side gallery, and it is a collection of trench art, which is basically things that were made out of ordnance or found objects that were made while they were deployed. Over on the right side, as you enter into the Atlantic Theater, there is a Seabee exhibit of all the different kinds of Seabees, because everybody comes in and they go, well, I need to see the Seabee. And my question to most Seabees would be, which one? because there are probably, I know, this is a retired Master Chief's wife who is chuckling at me in the corner because she knows exactly of what I speak. There are at least 600 or 700 different examples of the Seabee logo. So it's like, which one? And they always get so offended when I say that, but I have to take the time to explain to them. So you can go over and see all the different ways that Seabees have used their own logo in different handmade items. Some of them they crafted themselves, some of them they purchased. There's one that's a rattan bee from the Philippines. I mean, any way you can think of that a bee can be made, it's been made. So if there's no other questions, please enjoy yourself in the museum. I'll be available to come up and take a look at what we've got. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Thank you.